Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My guest today is Mr. Nick Trotta, who's a former Secret Service Assistant Director, and on 9/11, he was tasked with protecting the First Lady, Laura Bush, in Washington, D.C. Therefore, he had a very high-profile role, and he will give us his very peculiar angle of that day. Thanks for your time, Nick. Thanks for joining me today.
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the insights and behind the scenes, and it gives a good opportunity to give back to the community when you're able to share.
Well, would you like first to introduce yourself and tell my viewers something about your background, who you are, what point in your career you were in 2001, what you did after, whatever you
Sure,
feel like is useful. Go ahead.
sure. Um, well, I served in the Secret Service for 31 years, and I'm a native New Yorker, and my family we're all born in Italy except myself. I was the only one. I was born in New York. Joined the Secret Service right after college and after some other work. But getting in, I had different assignments to include uh, having the opportunity to establish an office in Milan, Italy, which is now in Rome. But To answer your question on September 11, at that time, I was the assistant special agent in charge of the president's protective detail. President Bush and the First Lady and their children. So I was assigned to the president's detail, and I was the assistant special agent in charge. That day, I was actually the afternoon supervisor. We have a few folks at my rank that would work the morning and then the afternoon, depending on the president's schedule and or the first lady. That day did you want me to go right into that day now, or?
Sure, whatever you feel is important, that comes
So
naturally. Yeah.
yeah, so that day was pretty interesting because if Hollywood was to script that morning, they probably describe it as, the cloudless day, a completely blue day of blue sky, and I'm sure it was. I recall it really being a nice day. But I was the afternoon supervisor. President Bush was in Florida, and I'm not sure why, but I came in early in the morning, and I was actually we have a couple of physical fitness centers that we're privileged to use, and I was using one on the White House complex. It was pretty early in the morning, and I had the sports network on to catch up on, a lot of the sporting events, the American sports. Baseball was still underway. I'm a big Yankee fan, and I was watching all the highlights. And then the interruption occurred on the broadcast, and the plane had hit the Twin Tower, one of the towers. I had immediately remembered a story and seeing a news article as a young child, a Cessna back in the 40s hitting the Empire State Building. So I don't know why my brain went directly to that. I actually then went and called my mother um, because my parents, for whatever reason, they lived about 20 miles north of Manhattan, but my parents had a tendency to take the train, and they did a passeggiata. They did a nice little walk once they got off the train in New York City. They love to do that occasionally, more often, sometimes just for coffee, a small pizza, and then they'd come back on the train. So I decided I better call my mother. While I had my mother on the phone, the second plane had hit. Now, my parents, they understood English, but the language, it was at times difficult. So Italian was the primary language. But I did tell my mother to get my father and to put the news on the television, and they would be able to pick up what was happening and told them obviously to stay in. And I knew at that moment that the country was under attack. I had to get off the phone quickly, and I quickly changed into my regular work clothes and responded to, at the time, Mr. Truscott was the agent in charge. I convened in his office. At the time, Mrs. Bush, the First Lady, and her protective detail, all under the umbrella of the President's protective detail, was at the U.S. Capitol. And I knew that that detail would need support. The decision was made that I would go with her, or I would meet up with her as we were relocating. Her team was relocating her to what is now publicly disclosed. They moved her to the Secret Service headquarters, which is a few minutes away. I decided to grab as many agents, special agents, as I could that were on the grounds, White House grounds with me. And as the vehicle was coming up to drive us, and you could just imagine the chaos on the streets. At that time, I had overheard on our security radio that there were about 6 planes in the continental U.S. airspace that were not being that were not put down by FAA. At that moment, you can imagine after the second plane, FAA was having a ground stoppage, but also having all air traffic land. Those in the East Coast were going up to Halifax in Canada. When I got outside the gate on 17th Street in Washington, if I looked left because I was waiting for the car as pulling up, my brain says I heard an explosion. I don't think I did, but I saw the smoke. I did not know it was the Pentagon. I didn't have any indication it was the Pentagon. The only thing that, again, we heard was that there were 6 aircrafts still unaccounted for. We got into the vehicle, and I arrived with the group that I had with the agents I had. We ended up meeting. The First Lady was already in the secure environment. You can imagine the chaos in the streets at that time of pedestrian, but also vehicle. It was until we were driving that we heard that there was a plane that had landed, that crashed in Pennsylvania, and that the Pentagon was hit. So at that moment, we like to we use the phrase, you're in a fog of war. You're in a fog of information. You had so much information coming through that we did not know what was real, what wasn't real, what was factual. We just didn't have all that information. It was like it was a fog, and you're trying to dissect what was going on. And of course, my priority was to make sure that we had all the resources established for the First Lady, not knowing what these other attacks were going to be.
Well, when you met her for the first time, on that day, I mean, of course, what did she say? What were her main concerns?
Well, the headquarters has numerous conference rooms, and the team had taken her to one of the conference rooms. And when she had just got settled in there, when I arrived and went in, I briefed first with the team to see make sure that we had everything, and if there was things that she may have said, because it was pretty quick. It was a quick evacuation that they did. They did an outstanding job. When I went in, Mrs. Bush the director of the Secret Service at the time was bringing down TV monitors to allow the First Lady, she had one staff with her, so that they can monitor the news like the rest of the world was. When I got in the room, Mrs. Bush was seated, and I went up to her and, I asked her, is she okay? And the first thing she said to me was, "How is your family?" And I get emotional thinking about it. I hope I didn't say something stupid like "what," but I think I said, "Excuse me." She said, "How is your family? Do you know where all your family is?" And I said, "Yes, yeah, we do. Thank you. And are all the agents okay?" So here in this moment of this unbelievable crisis, the first thing she's asking is if we're okay. Um, so I was not surprised, but at that moment, I was obviously caught off guard, but totally expected. That's the way the First Lady, Laura Bush, is worried about us. Um, her next question to me was pretty direct, and it was about I want to get a hold of Barbara and Jenna. Barbara, her two daughters. Barbara was at the University of Yale, which is in the northern part, was in New Haven, Connecticut, not far from New York City. I mean, it's a couple hours, but very close when you think of the enormity of the disaster that occurred. Jenna Bush was attending the University of Texas, which is in Austin. I assured her that I had communication with both details. Barbara and Jenna were already under Secret Service protection. The daughters were quickly taken and evacuated and brought to safe locations. So I was very comfortable in sharing and ensuring the First Lady that Barbara and Jenna were safe. Then we got actually into, because her father-in-law, former President George H. Bush, and former First Lady Barbara Bush had just left the White House. They I believe they were flying back to Houston or Maine. Don't quote me on that, but it was either one of those. They ended up being forced to land in Milwaukee. And I assured them that as soon as we maintained contact, that I would get an update. But, again, they have Secret Service protection, so I was comfortable. The next thing was the president. Where is the president? So I assured her that the president, at that time, the president was still in Florida. I was in communication with Mr. Morenzel, who was the deputy agent in charge of the president's detail. I had been in contact with him to assure him that the president's children were safe and in safe locations, that the First Lady was in a secure environment. And I was relaying that information. I had already been told that the president was going to relocate. And when I had the opportunity, I would pass that to the First Lady once that decision was made. I didn't want to provide information that may not happen, and then I got to go back in and say, "Oh, by the way, they didn't do that." She was watching the news of what was happening. And I then stepped out. I felt that let me get out of give her some privacy, and I went talked with the team outside our conference room, just to make sure that we had all the resources, not knowing how long we were going to be there and what was going to be our plan for the First Lady, especially if we had to prepare overnight. Where would we, if we had to relocate, and let's start making a plan if we were able to, if we had to remain where we were or to relocate. At that time, now the news was out. You had the landing in the crash in Pennsylvania, and then the Pentagon. We were hearing so much. We were hearing that planes were landing, that a plane crashed at Camp David. We were hearing, and it was broadcast over the news, that a plane landed at the president's ranch in Crawford, Texas. There was a plane en route to the White House. When I went back into the room to the first lady to want to check on her and to see if she wanted to know when she could speak with the president. I assured her that we're working on that communication, and I informed her that the president was getting ready to depart Florida and was going to go to another location. When you look at how that attack was on 9/11, this may be difficult for people to understand, but the safest spot for the president was actually being in the sky.
Yeah, sure. On the Air Force One.
And it's not having all the facts of what was happening, where these attacks were. So I assured her that the president was going to be relocating, and as soon as I had confirmation, I would inform her where he was, and that we were going to get communication and link her up so that she could speak with the president. At the time, there wasn't much military support provided to a first lady. Things have changed after 9/11. That day, I was able to coordinate with the White House Military Office to have a military representative so that we can better enhance communications with the First Lady. And that link was set up. The First Lady did end up speaking briefly with the president. I wasn't in the room when they spoke. There was a lot of news that the First Lady was receiving. She was watching the major networks and was hearing the same. Everyone was in this fog of different attacks. She had asked, was there an attack at the ranch in Texas? And again, her concern was not the property, was Jenna, her daughter. You know, you're looking at about a less than an hour, maybe an hour and a half distance between the ranch and University of Texas. So that was the concern, that, wow, if there was if a plane landed, you know, and attacked a house in Crawford, I'm concerned about Jenna, because Jenna's there, we're not there. And I assured her that I was in communication with the security detail at the ranch, as we were from Camp David, and there were no other attacks.
Okay, that would have been indeed my next question. You did already tell me that you guys tried to get in touch with the president. And what I'm wondering now is, were you guys also in touch with the White House and with the Vice President, Dick Cheney, and Condoleezza Rice at the PEOC?
So the way the answer is yes. I was fortunate because the special agent in charge, Carl Truscott, did not make the trip with the president. So he was at the White House. I went, teamed up with the First Lady. Mr. Morenzel, the deputy, was with the president. The vice president and Condoleezza Rice arrived at the White House. Mr. Truscott then went directly and stayed with them. So we really had a great link. I did not ask a lot of questions, or, you know, I didn't want to be a burden of asking questions or providing too much, you know, of, you know, every minute, like checking in and things like that, because he was worried, he was concerned of, you know, what's the next steps for the president. Mr. Morenzel's with the president, so I'm not going to, you know, hound them. They're not. I would check in every so often with them, but I knew where that the Vice President, Condoleezza Rice, were already in, as now history has shown that they were, underground at the White House, and in great communication. And communication was tested that day. Cell towers in the East Coast, Washington, D.C., and in other areas were impacted. And yeah, we were able to override some, but as history has shown and is well documented now, at times the links that you thought were going to work did not work.
Well, were you guys in the morning hearing rumors about other planes coming towards DC, hijacked planes, I mean?
I'm sorry?
Did you guys in the morning of 9/11 hear rumors about other hijacked plane coming towards DC?
Prior to the tower?
No, I mean after the Pentagon, because other witnesses told me
Yes.
that they thought that United 93 was heading to
Correct.
Capitol, which actually was. But before knowing that it had crashed into the ground, they still thought that there was another plane coming towards DC.
Yes, that's correct. And again, where the first lady was at the U.S. Capitol, so she was taken to a secure location at the Capitol. I was changing immediately into back into work clothes, and while I was responding to the office, word was being put out over our secure radios about these unidentified, unaccountable aircrafts. FAA was already having aircrafts on the ground that they must land, but there were, at one point when I was outside, there were 6 unaccounted for. We had already heard about that planes may be coming towards us as a target. The White House had already evacuated. So that yeah, you're absolutely correct. And again, that was part of this. And those in military, whether United States, the Italian military, the British, you have this fog when these crises occur, and there's so much information coming in. And again, we were hearing that planes crashed at Camp David. We heard that, again, planes that were landing in other parts of the United States, which turned out not to be true. But at times, I have to be honest, there was no time to start thinking about the planes landing or, as in other targeted areas because of, what we had to do. Once we had things established, then we were able to dissect and figure out, well, let's reach out to Camp David. Was there a plane? So now we have how many planes are unaccounted for, and the numbers kept dwindling. Okay, FAA is identifying that there's 3 left. In fact, and I know we're jumping forward here, but to stick with that night when the First Lady and the President finally reunited at the White House, and I'm going on poor memory now, but by the time the night ended for them, because President Bush addressed the nation from the Oval Office, but it was pretty late when everyone, the first family, went back to their quarters and went to bed. We were huddled up. We, as the supervisors of the president's detail, were all convened in the agents in charge office. And we got an alert. And it was around midnight, if my memory serves right, that we had an unidentified aircraft from the south coming towards Washington. And within seconds, and again, the president is never left alone. So the security, the detail with the president and first lady evacuated. We sprinted. And by the time I got to the president and first lady, they were already in their secured environment. And it turned out to be a military aircraft. Because at that moment, there was no aircrafts in the United States. The U.S. military had secured the the airspace over the United States. So this was an aircraft not responding to commands. So now here we go again. And it turned out to be a U.S. aircraft because you only had seconds to react. So at that moment, though, if I can go back now, yes, there was quite a bit of reports. We were hearing that there was attacks at the Sears Tower in Chicago, which turned out not to be true.
Wow, what a day. How did the day end with the First Lady? What did you guys say to each other when the day was over?
Well, um, when we when the First Lady and probably every couple want to get reunited at some point, and the president was being taken from base to base, and the decision then to return back to Washington. One of the things that I worked out with her detail, we didn't want to go, we didn't want to be there um, too far ahead. We kind of wanted to time it, uh, so that not that it would work out, minute by minute, but I wanted to arrive so that the first lady would be there, have time to obviously to get to the residence, and then the president arrive. I didn't want to create this, 3 hours time, so we waited until we got word that the president was just about to land at Andrews, and then again we had to. You can imagine the resources in Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police did an outstanding job, along with the Uniform Division of the Secret Service, in creating an environment in this. Remember, everyone's leaving Washington, and everyone is trying to get away from these main attractions: the U.S. Capitol, the White House, Treasury, government buildings. And what are we doing? We're going in the direction that everyone is coming. So Metropolitan Police, kudos to them, great partnership with them, and of course the Uniform Division of the Secret Service. They created a secure path for us to move the First Lady back to the White House. Once we determined that the airspace was secure, we had a handle of what was happening, because there was also, everyone talks about the air. Do you know how many reports we were getting of tractor trailers?
Oh yeah,
coming on the highways, and how many were being stopped coming into Washington, D.C., and how many were pulled over that were already in Washington. No one knew. And so local police were doing the best they could. So there was a lot of that also going on. But once we made that determination that the president was coming back, it was safe, obviously, safe location. President's coming back, going to deliver a message, got the first lady back. They met. And obviously, I was there when they met. And, privately, they, like any other couple, privately, they hugged and they hugged each other, and then they both went to the residence. The president actually went directly to the Oval Office, and then the president then began to deliver the speech. The first lady, I remember the first lady speaking with the daughters, and we used Secret Service communications to help that, because the cell towers in the area of New York, they were down. So we were able to communicate through our networks that allowed the family to at least get that initial communication in.
What happened to you in the next days? Because I don't think that September 12th was a regular work day.
Now, yeah, it's a great question. You know, when we left the White House, we already had this other scare, and it was around midnight. You know, maybe 11:45 or so, and then we huddled back up to we every country's protective detail of their prime ministers and presidents. We all talk about these crises, attacks. Did we study and practice the magnitude of 9/11? No, we talked about attacks from planes, but this magnitude. And then how do we now move forward? Because we've been attacked, and how are we going to move forward? We don't, the enemy wasn't a lone attack. This was a planned attack, and life has to go on in the United States. What we consider we have the most important prize in the world. The White House is a target. The president just addressed the country, addressed the world. The president's getting back to work. And then you have the domestic agenda. And then you have to address, the president has to address the nature of this attack. And how do we work? How does the Secret Service work so that the president can affect his message? If it was our decision, sir, you stay in your room and you don't come out.
Of course.
You don't have to leave the White House, but that didn't happen. And we had to be prepared for that. So that was the discussion till at least 2 to 2:30 in the morning. And of course, we decided, well, we could sleep here, but we're going to need clothes. So it's just best that we get home. And I think went home, showered, got some clothes, and came back pretty early the next morning. And, we did an interview once, Mr. Morenzel and I. Someone asked that same question, and I think we looked at each other that night, and I think we all did, and just said, okay, see you in a couple hours, because this doesn't end. And now we've got to figure out, okay, how do we enhance what we have? Do we have, where was, is there time to do a debriefing? Because we have to do one to see what worked, what didn't work. And there was a lot of challenges we faced. Communications, getting a hold of people, whether it's personal or, work related via communication, were challenges. How do we fix that? We didn't have time to do it all there, but we created the teams to move forward. But it was almost business as usual, meaning, okay, the president and the first lady have an agenda. And the first lady wasn't going out the next day, but the president obviously was very active. And then shortly after, the president flew to ground zero.
Yeah. And says the whole world will hear you in
Right.
a very iconic speech. Well, has 9/11 given you a new insight into being a Secret Service agent?
One of the things, as I reflect on 9/11, so the answer is not an easy yes or no. Of course, the answer is yes, right? 9/11 is one of those moments where you pause when you have that second to think. Because our job as agents on a protective detail, we're there for one purpose. That's to cover the protectee and evacuate them. The staff, if we make a wrong turn to get the president on stage, I'm sure the staff will say, what's Nick doing? What's Trotta doing? We'll get them, but the agents train to cover and evacuate. primary mission. So when these things occur, we're trained actually not to think. We want to react. You want to react to the sound, to the alert, maybe that the other agents are giving. But when you get that moment to answer the question, 9/11 was that moment the way you pause. Oklahoma, the attack at the Oklahoma City, I lost a good friend. The Secret Service lost 5 employees. We lost a lot of Americans, and it was a homegrown attack. Yeah. And that pause, on 9/11, when you said that things changed on September 12th, well, on September 10th, and even the morning of the 11th, when I went to work, as my colleagues went to work, as Americans went to work, they had the same expectation as I did. They expected to go home. And many people didn't get that opportunity.
Yeah.
So you do reflect. You do reflect. As I once went to Oklahoma City after the bombing, and it hit me so cold that my friends had probably left dishes in their sink that morning, expecting to go home to clean them, and they never did. So yeah, it does. The 9/11 changed everything, let alone security procedures, but it changed our whole way of life. Just as some of the things that we're experiencing, with all of these different types of violence, it causes us to now reflect, and everything that was occurring, right? Something drop on the street after 9/11. Is it an attack? Well, it's just a water bottle. Okay, but how do we know? Let's close the street. So then you had, everyone was on edge. And then it's like, we've got to get back to life. And how do you do that at a measured approach? Yeah, so it does cause a pause. And it does change in a professional way, but also in a personal way.
Well, Nick, many thanks for all your very detailed account. I think that you gave us a very interesting overview of that day from your very precious and unique angle, because you were tasked with something very specific and very peculiar, and very few people can tell the account that you just gave us. So many, many thanks for your time again. And yes, before we close, Nick and I would like to thank Robert Savage and his namesake company for helping us meet each other and making the introductions. Nothing of this would have been possible without him. So thank you, Rob. I'll add the link to your company in the description of this video. Thanks again, Nick, for your time. And thanks everybody else for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.